Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. Xi Jinping has made a state visit to Vietnam 3 months after Hanoi upgraded relations with Washington to the highest strategic level, bringing its ties with the US on par with that of China. We ask why the Chinese leader's visit was significant and what it means not only for Vietnam but for great power rivalry. With me to discuss this are Lai I-chung, president of Taiwan think tank the Prospect Foundation, and Liou To-hai, National Chengchi University Adjunct Professor of Diplomacy and College of International Affairs WTO Studies Center Director. Both a warm welcome to the show today. According to the joint statement released by Vietnamese leader Nguyen Phu Trong and Xi Jinping, the two sides agreed to become a community with a shared future and to deepen cooperation on a number of fronts. They would strengthen their defense industry partnership as well as joint exercises and training. They would share experience in the issues of anti-secession and color revolutions by hostile forces and agreed to better manage their own territorial disputes. They also agreed to progress the two corridors, One Belt and Belt and Road Initiative by building cross-border rail and road reaching deep into their two countries. President Lai, let me come to you first. So Xi Jinping was actually invited by Hanoi to visit Vietnam. What does that invitation, the timing of that invitation, say about the relations between Vietnam and the US and China?
I believe this is part of Vietnam's balancing act, especially right after September, the U.S. President Biden's visit to Vietnam, as well as November, Japan Prime Minister Kishida's visit to Vietnam. Both of them, the U.S. and Japan, they achieved a so-called comprehensive strategic partnership with Vietnam, which basically is like a two notches and upward about this relationship. And of course, China will feel that this is sort of an encirclement, and so that this time the Vietnam's invitation of the Xi Jinping's visit to Vietnam is a way to reassure China that Vietnam did not join the United States or the Japan about the encirclement against the Chinese tactic.
Professor Liu, so was it sort of like equal balancing, or the fact that Xi Jinping came after, was that one-upmanship?
From Xi Jinping perspective, he wants something more special. So that's why this time they have moved their bilateral relationship to the upper level, what's called a community with shared future. That means higher than the comprehensive strategic partnership Vietnam concluded with the United States. This is a very important one. And the other one, of course, China wants to show this to Filipinos and the Americans. See, if Vietnam want to make friends with us, Vietnam can get a lot of goodies. That means economic assistance, technology, capital as well.
Okay. President Lai, there was some debate about the differences in interpretation over this phrase between the Vietnamese version and the Chinese version. So Chinese version called it China-Vietnam community with a common destiny. In the Vietnamese version, it says Vietnam-China community with a shared future that carries strategic significance. Do you believe that there's a difference in this interpretation?
The Chinese hope that the Vietnam will basically endorse Chinese positions, or the similar the alliances with China. That probably would not work out, especially if you look at the China-Vietnam discussions. South China Sea, that wasn't really touched. Vietnam, in order to demonstrate that the Philippines look at the Vietnam is not really on the Philippine side. I think the qualification itself sort of the signal to the China as well as to the United States that in that political positions, there is no such as endorsement. But of course, Vietnam itself still would like to maintain its balancing act about the United States, China, and also Japan.
Professor Liu, you mentioned that this common sort of this community, is something that is a higher level than simply comprehensive strategic, and that there are a couple of other countries, Myanmar and Thailand, are other countries that have reached this sort of agreement with China. For you, what does this community with a shared future or community with a common destiny, what does this mean?
I think big difference is if you talk about common destiny, it seems both sides are going to bundle together forever. You know, share the future. That means, so for the time being, we are together, a short term, but we don't know about future. Perhaps we will separate. Another important meaning is about why this is higher level, because the comprehensive strategic partnership is between two countries. When you talk about the community with shared future, that means ASEAN as a together even bigger. So that has strategic meaning.
So it's a multilateral framework that we're talking about here.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And what would your interpretation be of Xi said he wants the two countries to keep to socialism without any deviation?
So, you know, not too many communist states in our globe anymore, okay? Only China, Vietnam, North Korea, perhaps, you know, Cuba. And not too many. So that is why, and they happen to be bordering states. So if they get along well, in that case, they will be different. And so they consolidate their power against countries with different regimes.
That's right. So trying to stress the difference with the US,
yes.
I assume there. President Lai, you mentioned the Philippines. Of course, between Vietnam and China, there have been past hostilities, and you mentioned the South China Sea. Can you also tell us a little bit about the war of 1979 between those two countries?
Yeah, the 1979, the war, basically, in my view, that's sort of the Deng Xiaoping, his about the reassurance about with his alliance with the United States. At that time, that the Vietnam, of course, invaded Cambodia. So there's a strategic rationale that the China, due to its alliance with Cambodia, would like to pressure on Vietnam. But at that time, the Vietnam also defeated the United States. So that for the China and the United States to build the normalization process, especially the way that Nixon went to China for the rapprochement, precisely due to the U.S. trying to get out of the Vietnam War's contra. So this time the Chinese attack about the Vietnam sort of reconfirm that the China and the United States, in terms of Vietnam issue, they are in the same direction. They share the same goal. So I would say that
and they also didn't win, did they? Neither of those
China did not win,
yeah.
but I think for Deng Xiaoping, it's an important effort to let the U.S. know that China actually, in this sense, is working with the U.S. So I'm giving the United States what you wanted it. At the same time, that the future between China and United States, we can move forward. So although people would like to discuss about the detail about how China did not really win the war, but I think the whole point about China is not about winning the war. It's a reassuring its relationship with other important big powers, just like the United States.
Professor Liu, one analyst has said that of all the countries in the world, only Vietnam can actually stand up to China, possibly because of that history. Do you believe that that's true in today's era?
In many sense. For example, Vietnam is really a very tough bargainer. As they mentioned about, they are both comrades and brothers. So they're comrades together, fighting against the French, Americans, and later they fought each other. So that is why they knew each other quite well. And they also both are communists. So they have special channel. These kind of diplomatic channels through communism. Now also, Vietnamese have very tough, nationalism. So in that case, that is why even the war, if China continue to stay in Vietnam for a longer period, China might not be able to win because of the special, geographic location and weather, tough weather. So that is why, Vietnam is very tough bargainer because Vietnam knew China so well. People sometimes compare this with North Korea. And both of them tried to get a lot from China. In reality, China hasn't been able to get a lot from them.
Okay, special relationship. So moving back to the present day, President Lai, let's briefly talk about any deliverables from out of this visit. What can Xi Jinping say that he achieved in going there?
Well, I think the visit itself is the biggest achievement that Xi Jinping has made. Now, of course, China would like to brag about the continual railroad constructions and the possible technology cooperations. But the issue is that although right now a lot of investment in Vietnam that came from China, but basically Chinese investment in Vietnam is taking Vietnam as a way station to avoid the kind of U.S.-China trade war, so that the China started to send its company to invest in Vietnam, and so that they can re-export to the United States through Vietnam. So in a sense, actually, China needs Vietnam more than the Vietnam needs China. So if you look at the reality about this, in my view, I think that deliverable seems to be limited in my sense. And also about the shared common destiny, or the community of shared futures, that really goes down to what will be the action in the future. For example, will Vietnam re-siding with China in the South China Sea, especially toward Philippines, or the Vietnam in about the relationship with the United States will assist China in resisting the U.S. encirclement? That will be the real test. I doubt that Vietnam will.
Professor Liu, we mentioned the South China Sea a lot, and President mentioned that in the joint statement it wasn't specifically mentioned there. Do you think that Vietnam is viewing the current Chinese aggressions against the Philippines as a kind of warning? Is it heeding that warning and staying out of, away from its own claims in the South China Sea, sort of keeping quiet, trying to keep the peace?
Yeah, I think Vietnam learned the lesson, or Vietnam used to serve as ally of the United States when Obama was in power, talking about people to Asia. Actually, Vietnam was the country who came out to say China said, South China Sea are part of China. So Vietnam came first, but later, of course, everybody knows, Philippines become the frontier country to fight against China. So Vietnam learned the lesson, but nowadays Vietnam knows this is not a smart way. Smart way is to continue to have a good relationship with both superpowers and other regional powers. So Vietnam can eventually become a true leader of the ASEAN or big prosperous country.
President Lai, professor, said Vietnam now understands that it has to kind of cede its sovereignty claims in order to keep China happy.
No, I do not think that Vietnam is ceding the sovereignty claim, because you look at the statement and nothing has ever touched upon the South China Sea. But the issue is that would Vietnam really work with China against Philippine claim? That is not the case. But of course, people could also argue that Vietnam did not side with the Philippines against China either. But I think that the complexity is that Vietnam also has its dispute vis-a-vis Philippines in a certain area. So that put Vietnam in a very precarious position, whether they wanted to side it or not. So the best way for them is to let both U.S.-China knows that Vietnam has its own positions. It's better not to really try to push Vietnam to the extent that Vietnam has to choose.
So you think that Vietnam actually kind of won its battle with China in the South China Sea?
At least what I see is that Vietnam did not cede its position toward China in the South China Sea.
Okay. President Lai, so tell me, was rare earth minerals, was this something that was part of the agreement between the two countries, given that Vietnam is the second biggest source globally for rare earth materials and China is the biggest processor?
Yeah, definitely. I think that during the U.S.-China competition, one of the most important thing for the U.S. concern is to ensure the supply chain, especially from the rare earth mineral supply that will be in the hand of the trusted partners. So will not subject to the Chinese possible economic coercions. And Vietnam, with the second largest reserve in the whole world, become very attentive and and attractive partners for the United States. So that during the September President Biden's visit to Vietnam, in one of the statement agreement, they actually touch upon the rare earths to a significant degree, including how the United States will help to quantify Vietnam's reserve in this field. What China wants to do is to secure that Vietnam not fall into the U.S. orbit, to prevent Vietnam from being a part of the U.S. supply chain competition vis-a-vis China. And I think that's what is in Xi Jinping's mind in his visit to Vietnam.
But there was no deliverable, there's no announceable. So does that send a message that Vietnam's happy to remain in the U.S. orbit in terms of rare earth?
I think probably U.S. and actually offer more. But Vietnam basically just go along with the Chinese statement, but not really the kind of deliverable that came out.
Okay. Now, Professor Liu, we mentioned there that there was commitment to progress the 2 corridors and 1 belt, as well as Belt and Road Initiative. Can you explain what the 2 corridors and 1 belt is? Yeah,
this is actually very important for China as well as for Vietnam. For China, China wants to use the high-speed railway down to the Southeast Asia, and in terms of the relations between the 2 countries, they have the corridor from the Yunnan Kunming through Laojie and Hanoi. This is a western corridor, and then the eastern corridor is from the Guangxi Nanning through Liangshan to Hanoi, and then there's actually what's called one belt. That's from Hanoi to the east to the Tonkin Bay Rim economic sphere. So that including the Vietnam's very important Haiphong and Qingzhou, very good ports. So in case they can link all together, in that case Vietnam can benefit a lot from China's exports.
Okay, significant economic development going on there. Professor Liu, and of course Vietnam has traditionally been a skeptic of Belt and Road Initiative, and it's actually quite late to the party. Tell me, why is that changing now?
Yeah, I think Vietnam now is under tremendous pressure from the neighboring states like Cambodia, Thailand, Laos. Already China's high-speed railway already arrived at Laos, and then continue to Thailand. So that means Vietnam is here, Laos, Thailand is already gone through. That is why Vietnam has to strengthen its economic interaction with China through the 2 corridors and the 1 belt. And of course, perhaps in the future, Vietnam will allow China to build the high-speed railway from the north to the south. That's what Vietnam wants to build, and China wants to get this bid. That was given to Japan, but later they canceled. So that is why China maintained that hope.
So basically excluding, at the moment, Vietnam is excluded completely from the picture, from the jigsaw. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So in the 1980s, Vietnam embarked on a path of rejuvenation or innovation known as Doi Moi. Through free market reforms, Vietnam's GDP per capita has risen from around $400 before the reforms to around 4,000 today. Hanoi's state goal is to become a high-income nation by 2045. Professor Liu, let me come to you first. So, we said there that Vietnam's GDP per capita is around $4,000. That's compared to, more than 10 times for the US. How will Vietnam's leaders go about, reaching this goal, and what sort of strategic relationships are they eyeing?
Vietnam tend to focus on economic reform and build up the power in order to become a leader of the ASEAN. So that is why they wanted to, in the past few decades, since the 1986 Doi Moi, they have already eradicated many people, a million people from the below the poverty line. And also, in terms of literacy, 90% of literacy. So in that case, the Vietnamese can work very hard, and so that is why nowadays Vietnam has already become a labor-intensive manufacturing hub. Even move already to electronic products, smartphone, Now they want to become a hub of semiconductor manufacturing.
Yeah. So how do they see US versus China in their path to this goal?
The semiconductor, that's their future goal. In that case, US can help them a lot. That is why when President Biden went there, Biden promised taking about 500 billion fund to provide the assistance to help the Vietnamese to nurture their semiconductor engineers. Because now Vietnam government wants to have 200,000 semiconductor engineers, but so far they own less than 20%. That means only 40,000. So long way to go. In that case, U.S. can have Vietnam in a big way, not necessarily China.
Okay. President Lai, let's move now to Vietnam's relations with Taiwan. Does China hinder those relations? And Taiwan, as we know, has placed Hanoi kind of central to President Tsai's new southbound policy in the region.
I would say that Taiwan's new southbound policy has different centers. Vietnam is one of them, but Vietnam is not the center. It's one of the centers. The new southbound policy basically look at each country's specific characteristic and how they can match with Taiwan, so that Vietnam has its own way about its position in the new southbound policy. I would say that Vietnam is very delicately trying to walk between the Taiwan-China and walk through the rope. That it continue to welcome Taiwan's investment and economic engagement, but at the same time avoid political commitment toward Taiwan in order not to agitate or angry in China. I would say that the Taiwan-Vietnam relationship, as the United States, as you just mentioned, would like to invest more in Vietnam, whether cultivating its engineer talent or try to build up the other infrastructures. The Taiwan-Vietnam economic relations and the technology cooperation certainly will boost up.
Professor Liu, so walking that delicate balance between the economic and the political, let's look at some of the figures for Taiwan-Vietnam relationship. So investment, Taiwan is Vietnam's fourth largest source of investment. In terms of trade, Taiwan is Vietnam's fifth largest trading partner. Does there come a point where the relationship, the economic relationship with Taiwan makes it something that China dislikes?
If you say that, perhaps about the relocation of production lines away from China to Vietnam, I'm talking about Taiwanese investors in the past few years. Why it's of course primarily relevant to Sino-U.S. power struggle. So that is why Taiwan's big companies like Foxconn, Wingstrong, Kangpo, Guangda, many others, they all have factories in Vietnam in order to produce their products. Because the U.S. is the final destination of all of those products. So that is why Vietnam continue to enjoy this kind of Taiwanese investment and the technology transfer in the past few years. For example, like smartphone, Apple. Apple, that's Foxconn is responsible for that.
Right. And finally, Professor mentioned that Vietnam has aspirations to be a leader in ASEAN. What do you think its goal is in the region and even globally?
No, I'm sorry. I do not think that Vietnam to become the leader in ASEAN. Not because Vietnam is not strong. Vietnam definitely has a capability and wants to be strong and will continue to grow its national power. But you have Indonesia right there. Indonesia is a geographical location as well as a population will dwarf any country within ASEAN. Although the Vietnam has a significant population, close to 100 million, but Indonesia is about at least twice or even 3 times the population of Vietnam. And Indonesia already has the the vast infrastructures that is there, and Indonesia traditionally has been the big power within the ASEAN. So that for Vietnam to be the leader of the ASEAN, it has to really surpass Indonesia, which is a very difficult goal to get there. And finally, I'll say that, Vietnam will continue to grow and probably will become one of the very significant pole within the ASEAN, especially in the continental Southeast Asia. Continental Southeast Asia traditionally has been the center around the Thailand. But right now, I think that Vietnam, with its growth, probably will be able to catch up with Thailand and even surpass it. So that if we are talking about Southeast Asia in terms of maritime Southeast Asia, which will be dominated by the Indonesia, but the continental Southeast Asia, I think Vietnam definitely has the potential to be the #1.
Professor Liu, there's ambition and then there's reality. Do you think that Vietnam can become the leader, or do you agree with President?
Of course, Indonesia is a strong competitor. But don't forget, Vietnam has already become the FTA hub in Southeast Asia. It's a member of RCEP, it's a member of CPTPP. Vietnam also have an FTA with EU. So that is why Vietnam continue to enjoy its position as manufacturing hubs. And don't forget, Vietnam's population is still the third largest population in ASEAN. And Vietnam people, from Korean perspective, Vietnam people work very, very hard. The only people who can compete with Chinese.
So coming back to that theme.
That's still promising. We don't know final result, of course.
Okay, remains to be seen, maybe in a decade or so. Thank you so much for joining the show, Lai I-chung and Liou To-hai. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.